I'm the one you're looking for. I've killed 8 people. In 1973, a 300-pound giant with an IQ of 145 walked into a police station and confessed to murder so calculated, so brutal, that even seasoned detectives couldn't comprehend what they were about to hear. December 18, 1948, Burbank, California. Edmund Emil Kemper III is born into what appears to be a normal American family. His father, Edmund Jr., is a World War II veteran. His mother, Clarnell, is a sharp-tongued woman with impossibly high standards. But normal is the last thing this household would be. From the earliest age, Edmund, or Ed as he'd come to be known, showed signs that something was deeply wrong. At age 8, he was already 6 feet tall, towering over his classmates. Kids bullied him, called him Big Ed, freak, weirdo. But it was home where the real damage was done. Clarnell Kemper was an alcoholic who suffered from what we'd now recognize as borderline personality disorder. She would rage at Edmund, tell him he was going to be a failure, that he reminded her of his father, whom she despised. Clarnell's abuse was systematic and cruel. She was convinced that young Edmund would sexually assault his sisters, so she forced him to sleep in a locked basement, essentially a dungeon, beginning when he was just 8 years old. She would lock me in the basement and tell me that's where I belonged, with the monsters. She said I scared her, that I had the eyes of a killer. Isolated in that basement night after night, Edmund's fantasies grew darker. He played disturbing games, cutting the hands and heads of his sister's dolls, acting out execution scenes. At age 10, the violence moved beyond dolls. Edmund's sister had 2 cats. He took one of them, buried it alive in the backyard, and waited. After it died, he dug it up, cut off its head with a machete, and kept the skull in his closet as a trophy. This is textbook early warning behavior. The McDonald triad: bedwetting, fire setting, and animal cruelty. These are predictors of violent behavior in adulthood. Kemper checked every box. His second cat? He killed it with a machete at age 13, slicing the animal almost completely in half. When his mother found out, she didn't get him help, she just got angrier. I would have fantasies about killing her, detailed fantasies, but I was too scared, so I killed cats instead. By age 15, Edmund's parents had divorced, and his father wanted nothing to do with him. In August 1964, Clarnell shipped Edmund off to live with her parents, Edmund's grandparents, at their remote ranch in North Fork, California. For a few months, it seemed like country life might be good for the troubled teenager. He helped around the ranch, went hunting with his grandfather, seemed to be adjusting. But on August 27, 1964, everything changed. Edmund had been arguing with his grandmother, Maud, that morning. She was writing a children's book at the kitchen table. He'd been reading at the table with his rifle nearby. He'd been hunting earlier that day. At around 4:15 p.m., as his grandmother sat writing, something in Edmund snapped. He picked up his .22 caliber rifle, aimed it at the back of his grandmother's head, and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. I just wondered how it would feel to shoot Grandma. I was wondering what it would be like to kill Grandma. But Edmund wasn't done. His grandmother lay dead on the floor, but panic set in. His grandfather, also named Edmund, would be home from grocery shopping soon. He'd see what happened. Edmund waited in the driveway, rifle in hand. When his grandfather's car pulled up, he shot him dead before he even got out of the vehicle. Then Edmund called his mother. I called my mother and told her what I'd done. She told me to call the police and tell them. When police arrived, 15-year-old Edmund Kemper was calm, almost detached. He told them he killed his grandmother because he was tired of getting on his case. When asked why he killed his grandfather, his answer was chillingly practical. I didn't want him to see what I'd done to Grandma. This shows calculation even at 15. He's thinking ahead, eliminating witnesses. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was problem-solving through murder. Edmund Kemper was arrested,
tried as a juvenile and sent to Atascadero State Hospital for the criminally insane. He would spend the next 5 years there. Most people assumed he'd never get out. They were wrong. Atascadero State Hospital in 1964 was a maximum security psychiatric facility housing California's most dangerous mentally ill criminals. Edmund Kemper, at 15 years old and already 6 feet 4 inches, was among them. But Kemper did something unexpected. He became a model patient. Edmund was exceptionally bright. His IQ tested at 136, later at 145. He was smarter than most of the staff treating him. Kemper worked in the psychology lab, administering tests to other patients. He had full access to psychological evaluations, testing materials, and diagnostic criteria. He studied them obsessively. I learned what answers they wanted to hear. I memorized the tests. When they'd give me the same test 6 months later, I knew exactly how to score normal. This is what makes Kemper so dangerous and so fascinating to study. He understood his own psychopathy. He could analyze his urges, his thoughts, and then hide them perfectly. He became an expert at appearing normal. By 1969, psychiatrists at Atascadero concluded that Kemper was cured. Their reports described him as no longer a danger to himself or others. They recommended his release. The California Youth Authority agreed. At 21 years old, Edmund Kemper was released on parole. His probation officer even had his juvenile record sealed, erasing the grandparent murders from his official history. There was just one condition: he couldn't live with his mother. So naturally, they sent him to live with his mother. In 1969, Edmund moved back to Santa Cruz to live with Clarnell, who was now working as an administrative assistant at UC Santa Cruz. The fights started immediately. Clarnell berated Edmund constantly about his lack of ambition, his appearance, his intelligence that she felt he wasted. She worked at a university surrounded by bright, attractive young co-eds. She'd come home and tell Edmund that girls like that would never want someone like him. She'd come home and talk about these pretty college girls, how smart they were, how successful they'd be. And then she'd look at me and say, "Too bad you'll never have one of them." Edmund got a job with the California Division of Highways, working on road crews. With his paychecks, he bought a motorcycle, then later a car, a 1969 Ford Galaxy. He applied to become a state trooper, dreaming of authority and respect. He was rejected. At 6 feet 9 inches and nearly 300 pounds, he exceeded the physical requirements. This rejection was devastating to Kemper. He wanted to be law enforcement. Instead, he began collecting police equipment, handcuffs, badges. He learned police codes by listening to scanners. He was building a costume. But Edmund found a way to get close to law enforcement anyway. He started frequenting the Jury Room, a bar in Santa Cruz popular with cops. Big, friendly Ed would buy rounds, listen to their stories, and ask about cases they were working on. The cops loved him. They called him Big Ed. They told him he should have been a cop himself. None of them knew what he'd done to his grandparents. That record was sealed, and none of them suspected what Edmund was planning. By early 1972, Edmund's fantasies were consuming him. He'd drive the coastal highways around Santa Cruz, watching young women hitchhike to and from the university. The area was thick with hitchhikers. It was the tail end of the hippie era, and catching rides was common and considered safe. You have to understand what Santa Cruz was like then. It was a college town, very liberal, very trusting. Girls thought nothing of getting into a car with a stranger. It was a different time. Edmund began doing practice runs. He'd pick up hitchhikers, always young women, and drive them to their destination. He was testing himself, testing his control, learning what worked. I'd have my guns in the car, my knives. I'd pick up girls and I'd be talking to them, having a normal conversation, and in my mind I'd be thinking about killing them. But I would take them where they needed to go and let them out. I was waiting until I knew I could do it right. He removed the passenger seat lock in his car so women couldn't escape. He kept the murder tools hidden but accessible: a gun, knives, plastic bags, even handpaths he'd bought at a police supply store. On May 7, 1972, Edmund picked up two girls on the highway near Fresno, 18-year-old Marianne Pesky and 18-year-old Anita Lucchesa. Both were students at Fresno State, hitchhiking back to campus after visiting friends at Stanford. They saw a large, friendly-looking man in a nice car. He seemed safe, normal. He offered them a ride. They got in. It was the last time anyone would see them alive. Edmund drove past their exits. When they protested, he pulled a gun. He drove them to a remote wooded area near Alameda. There, he forced Marianne into the trunk at gunpoint. He took Anita into the woods. When she tried to run, he caught her easily. He was twice her size.
He stabbed her repeatedly, then strangled her with such force that he broke the bones in her neck. Then he went back for Marianne. He pulled her from the trunk and stabbed her to death in the back seat of his car. This is where Kemper's crimes become particularly disturbing. The murders themselves weren't enough for him. Edmund drove the bodies back to his apartment. His mother was at work. He had privacy. He brought the bodies inside, laid them on his bed, and spent hours engaging in acts of necrophilia and dismemberment. He took Polaroid photographs. He kept body parts as trophies. The next morning, he cut up what remained, buried some parts in the mountains, and threw others off cliffs into the ocean. Then Edmund Kemper went to work his shift with the highway department. He had dinner with his mother that night. He went drinking with his cop friends at the jury room. Nobody suspected a thing. For 4 months after the murders of Marianne Pace and Anita Lucchesa, Edmund went dormant. But on September 14, 1972, he picked up 15-year-old Aiko Koo, a student at Cabrillo College who was hitchhiking to a dance class. Edmund took her to a remote area, suffocated her, then sexually assaulted her dead body. He buried her head in his mother's garden, facing toward the house. I talked to her head sometimes. I said, "I'm going to bury you in the garden so you can keep an eye on my mother." Then silence again. Months passed. Police had discovered the remains of Pace and Lucchesa, but had no leads. Aiko Koo was still missing. They didn't even know she was dead. Meanwhile, Edmund kept hanging out with police officers, drinking beer, and listening to them discuss the investigation into the co-ed murders. We had no idea. Ed was just this friendly guy who liked cops. He'd ask about the case, seemed interested like any citizen would be. He was getting information from us about our own investigation into his crimes. On January 8, 1973, Edmund picked up 19-year-old Cindy Shaw, a Cabrillo College student hitchhiking to a class. He shot her in the head with a .22 caliber pistol, then took her body back to his apartment. His mother was home this time, asleep in her room. Edmund carried Cindy's body past his mother's bedroom and into his own. He spent the night with the corpse, then dismembered her in his mother's bathtub while Clarnell slept. The risk-taking was escalating. He was keeping bodies in his apartment for longer periods. He was dismembering them with his mother in the next room. The thrill wasn't just the killing anymore. It was the danger of being caught. Edmund put Cindy's body parts in plastic bags and tossed them off cliffs along Highway 1. But he kept her head in his mother's apartment for several days before finally disposing of it. I cut off her head and I had it on my bed for a while. I was talking to it, saying things I could never say to a girl when she was alive. Less than a month later, on February 5, 1973, Edmund picked up 2 more victims, 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe and 21-year-old Alice Liu, both students at UC Santa Cruz. He shot them both in the head while driving, then took their bodies to his mother's apartment.
He decapitated both women in his mother's bed, engaged in necrophilia, and took more photographs. This time he did it in broad daylight, with his mother at work just blocks away on UC Santa Cruz's campus. By this point, we had 5 missing co-eds, bodies turning up along the coast. We knew we had a serial killer. We just had no idea he was living in plain sight, working a normal job, drinking with our officers. 6 young women were dead, but Edmund Kemper still hadn't killed the person he'd been fantasizing about for decades: his mother. On Good Friday, April 20th, 1973, Edmund decided it was time. I kept the girls alive in my head. I talked to them, but I couldn't keep doing that forever. It was time to finish what I'd started when I was 15 years old. Clarnell had spent the evening of April 20th drinking and berating Edmund as usual. Eventually, she went to bed around 5 a.m. Edmund waited. He sat in the living room, working up the courage. Around 5:30 in the morning, Easter Saturday, Edmund grabbed a claw hammer and walked into his mother's bedroom. Clarnell was asleep, face up in bed. Edmund raised the hammer and brought it down on her head with all his strength, then again and again. She woke up for a second. She tried to move, so I hit her again until she stopped. But Edmund wasn't done. Years of rage poured out. He grabbed a knife and cut off her mother's head. Then, in a symbolic act of fury, he cut out her larynx, her voice box, and tried to shove it down the garbage disposal. It seemed appropriate. She bitched and screamed and yelled at me for years. Even the garbage disposal couldn't stomach her. It kept spitting her parts back up. Edmund used his mother's severed head as a dartboard, throwing darts at her face. He screamed at it, released decades of pent-up rage. But there was a problem. His mother had invited her best friend, 59-year-old Sally Hallett, to dinner that evening. If Sally showed up and found Clarnell dead, Edmund would be the obvious suspect. So Edmund decided Sally had to die too. When Sally arrived for dinner at 4 p.m., Edmund told her his mother had gone out briefly and invited her inside. Once inside, he strangled her from behind, then beat her to death. He left Sally's body in a closet, wrote a note to police explaining what he'd done, and got in his car. Edmund Kemper drove east, leaving California behind. He drove through Nevada, through Utah. He listened to the radio, waiting to hear about the murders, waiting for roadblocks, waiting to be stopped. But nothing happened. By Easter Monday, April 23rd, Edmund had driven over 1,500 miles to Pueblo, Colorado. Still no news, no manhunt, no alerts. He couldn't believe it. "I was waiting to get caught. That's why I ran. But nobody was coming. Nobody even knew yet, so I figured I'd better tell them." At a payphone in Pueblo, Edmund called the Santa Cruz Police Department and asked for Detective Herbert. "I wasn't there. He got another officer, and Ed says, 'I'm the co-ed killer. I'm the one you're looking for.'" The officer thought it was a prank. We got a lot of false confessions in that case. The officer told Edmund to call back later, so he did. This time, he provided details that only the killer could know. He told them about the plastic bags, the burial sites, the photographs. He told them about his mother. Police in Colorado arrested Edmund at his motel and called Santa Cruz. When officers entered Clarnell Kemper's apartment, they found exactly what Edmund had described. The scene was one of the worst things I've ever seen in my career, and I'd seen plenty by that point. Edmund Kemper was extradited back to California. During interrogation, he confessed to everything, 8 murders total. He provided details, showed them burial sites, led them to evidence they'd never found. He never once asked for a lawyer. In my psychiatric evaluation of Edmund, I found him to be one of the most intelligent and self-aware subjects I've ever interviewed. He understood his pathology better than most psychiatrists. He knew exactly what he was and why. At trial, Kemper's lawyers tried an insanity defense, but the jury didn't buy it. On November 8, 1973, Edmund Kemper was found guilty on 8 counts of first-degree murder. He requested the death penalty. Death by torture, he said, would be appropriate. California gave him life imprisonment instead. Today, Edmund Kemper is 77 years old. He's incarcerated at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, where he's been since 1973. He's eligible for parole hearings, but he's waived every one since 1988. "I'm not even going to try. I know what I am. Society is safer with me in here." He's been interviewed extensively by FBI profilers, documentarians, and researchers. His insights into serial killer psychology have been used to train law enforcement. Kemper is the most disturbing interview I've ever conducted, not because of what he did, though that's horrible, but because of how he understands what he did. He can articulate the mind of a serial killer better than we can. What makes Edmund Kemper so frightening isn't just that he killed 8 people, it's that he was able to fool everyone, psychiatrists, police, his own victims, right until the moment he decided to stop fooling them. He proved that monsters don't always look like monsters. The story of Edmund Kemper is a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind a friendly smile, that intelligence doesn't equal humanity, and that the most dangerous predators are often the ones we never see coming. Edmund Kemper remains in prison. He has been denied parole multiple times and stated he will never leave prison. His next scheduled parole hearing would be in 2025, but he is expected to waive it. The families of his victims continue to oppose any possibility of his release.